Hey everybody, and welcome to another RCT2 review. Today we're looking at Age of Sail. It's a recent Spotlight winner on New Element, now with a pretty whopping 97% score. And today we are lucky to be joined by Alex himself to talk through the park and give us some insight on the build. So welcome.
Yes. Hi everyone, and thanks for having me, Brian. It's a pleasure to talk through it.
Absolutely. So this is number 4 Spotlight for you, I think, right?
Yeah, I'm not keeping track, but probably something like that.
Well, that's still pretty impressive
Yeah.
anyway. But so this is fully NCSO spotlight themed to, I guess, seafaring nations or of the world, more or
Yeah.
less.
I mean, to put it as broad as possible, like it's pirate themed. And I was kind of deliberately choosing somewhat a cliche or overdone theme, such as pirates, and thinking like, okay, a way to make that more interesting maybe is to really exhaust it by doing not only one pirate theme on a map, but the whole map has like four pirate sub themes, and then you kind of get some more interesting geographical nuance in the different areas and different cultures. So
Well,
that
let's
was my
jump.
kind of concept from the get go.
Pretty impressive. And I was kind of struck by the variety of themes and colors and textures and things like that, while still having that overarching, theme throughout all the different boat motifs and everything. And really, from a technical aspect, taking advantage of some of the newer open RCT features like the invisibility color palette. Like I was trying to figure out for the first time where these arches came from until I realized it was just the portcullis door with everything invisible except for the wall itself. So,
Yeah,
clever ideas like that.
yeah. It's funny you mentioned that because I think that expanded color palette, that innovation came in like really at the end of the project. And it was a bit like, oh, I had this feeling of like everything's gonna feel like I haven't made use of this tool. So
Mm.
it's kind of it's scattered around in some places, but it's definitely not as much as maybe if I would start a new park now, you know.
It's funny how that works though, because there's a certain number of things, and I can think back all the way to like tune supports and large trees and stuff like that with custom scenery, where it was always just like if you had a park midstream, it was like, well, crap, now I got to go redo a bunch of stuff because it's gonna look dated now. It's those like
Yeah,
specific like points in time of the RCT timeline that have created that sort of thing, and I think invisibility is one of those that's gonna be looked back on later as this changed a whole lot of stuff. But
yeah,
jumping into it, I love the walls here, like the parts of the pyramid, and then all the different textures. Like you can see all the different kind of striations of everything. That's very cool.
yeah, yeah. Thanks. I think one thing I was really focusing on with this park was kind of vertical scale and trying to have this sort of um yeah, this sense in the landscaping or with these kind of sea defenses, this kind of really dramatic height difference.
And
So
that's
yeah.
especially when we
And
get back to the more Asian area. I really love um, the landscape and the height differences and everything. Like it really is dramatic, like you say, and it kind of reminds me of sort of older school parks, and like I really love this whole landscape of the kind of rocky crags here, and then this landscape just sort of bubbling out of it and kind of falling down the cliffside and everything, like using these jungle bushes. I always liked that idea of the jungle bushes kind of hanging off of the sides here.
yeah. Yeah, I think another thing that I realized with no custom scenery is that, because the grain size is bigger, you don't have smaller landscaping objects. It just means you kind of have to go bigger for like cliffs and stuff so that, the bigger you go, the smoother it looks a lot of the time, you know.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting. So we're transferring out of the kind of main area into this sort of secondary area here that kind of has it felt to me more of like the traditional pirate from mainstream media kind of feel to it, where you had this your more traditional pirate roofs and everything in the wood and all that, and these just really impressive landscape features as it rolled into this little village here, and I loved the architecture of this space. This white castle tower here being kind of the only white thing in the area here, sort of as a beacon
Yeah,
of the rest of it.
yeah, yeah. This was, I think, the first area that I built, um, and it was originally like a possibly a design project around this inverted coaster.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, as you say, it was kind of the more typical aesthetic that we associate with pirates, I suppose, which is the kind of Caribbean, sort of palm trees and this sort of mixed with how do you say it, like a more like European Tudor
Hmm.
structure kind of buildings.
You get a lot of those like split timber type walls and everything, and just the stacked layering and everything. I like that quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think that was my kind of impetus to keep going with this project was like I found this trick where I could mix um these kind of wooden walls together with these poles and create this kind of nice looking timber frame houses. Sounds like, oh, this is really nice for like a kind of pirate thing. I should take this further. And then I
Hmm.
was like, actually, kind of want to make a full map and not just a design. And then it spurred me on to thinking like, okay, like what other themes could I go with this? Yeah, and then it was sort of brainstorming a bit, like, okay, I'll do like a also a kind of North African area and then a Southeast Asian area and yeah, so
It's
on.
amazing how that works. The one thing that spurs the next thing to the next thing to the next
Yeah,
thing, and then you get this
yeah,
just huge map from one little area. I love this queue. Walking through here, like this would be one of the coolest queues I would think to ever walk through, with the waterfall here, and then this kind of, like great high up off the water decking and
yeah,
everything, and just so nice.
yeah. It's pretty dramatic, and I think you might, it's for sure more elaborate than you would find in an actual theme park, right? But I think that's the kind of level of realism I was going for, like something that's a bit over the top and fantastical, where you
But I
would get
like
this
that.
kind of like, yeah, and
It's a
also from a kind of practical standpoint, I was really struggling with like um, how the station fits with the path and like where even would I fit a queue if I'm going to have this kind of water passing here. And kind of the only option was to really like circle this entire lagoon.
but I
Um,
love the
but yeah,
station here, kind
it
of
worked out
suspended above
nicely.
your water.
Yeah. So it's meant to be like a kind of upturned boat, which is sort
Hmm.
of straddling um, two rocks.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
super cool, unique setting. I feel like oftentimes we go a little more traditional, like it's got to have the space to do it, and sit on the ground somewhere and have the usual, you know everything that you need to do that. But it's kind of neat to change that up a little bit and say, all right, I can sit here, 8 tiles off of the water and float above the whole thing with a cool structure and all that. That's neat.
Yeah.
Love the
Yeah, it was quite fun with this park to just be a bit like free and not try and make it too sensible in that way.
love the layering here of all the track texture and everything. Just kind of add that little bit of crunch and the just kind of wood detailing and everything for the docks.
Yeah. In general, like good point about texture. That was something I was really trying to focus on with this project was making it very um yeah, making everything quite gritty and textured. You don't see that as much with ancient worlds, I don't think. It's much more like um I think there's an emphasis there on composition and sort of like um, volumes in the architecture. But with this park, it was really I wanted to explore like what happens when you have a very um, yeah, just almost like noisy feeling to it, like kind of really build up an atmosphere through that.
Well, it works for sure. I love the Nordic Jet. That's a fun one because you just don't see those done in RCT terribly often, or if you do, it's generally in like the a hyper realistic type park. So it's kind of neat to see that as a fun little added ride.
Yeah, it's annoying. I don't really know how to hack it so that it doesn't have this thing where it tips up after the splash. But yeah,
I've
it's
learned over
fine.
the years that I don't think anybody really cares. Like it's one of those things where
Yeah,
I can put in the couple hours to figure out the hack or do the hack, but I really think that when you look at it all said and done, doing it versus not doing it, you might as well just save the time and nobody really pays too much attention to it. Like it still gets the
yeah,
point across, and I love the look.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And this guy, I love this layout for this Crystal Hour bobsled coaster. It's just really pretty.
Thank you.
Wrapping the here, that's very cool.
Yeah, I think it's always fun to do these types of rides. That's for some reason there's especially in NCSO, like doing these supports always looks quite satisfying.
It does,
Like with
and
the
that is a tough
helixes and the
thing.
towers.
I feel like NCSO, especially just getting custom supports. I mean, I'll go back for a second here. Overall supports and the loop supports here. These are great. I guess you win a lot here with the single rail coaster and having that as a new feature. Well, new relatively, I guess, but
Yeah,
nice to have.
yeah, that definitely does a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to custom supports, I think. Yeah.
So we'll jump to the next area here. Sort of this Atlantis-ish type area. Really impressive in a lot of different ways. So I love the setting for this top spin, just with the waterfall behind it and the fountains and everything. Like it just you always see Fantasia Land's top spin show up on all like the social media stuff. I feel like this is that in RCT.
Yeah, I think like my only real life reference point for this ride is the one at Alton Towers, Ripsaw, and for whatever reason, I always associate it as like you have some kind of water features around this type of ride. So I think in every park that I put one in, that's just generally what I do. Like I'll have some kind of fountain or waterfall or yeah, and then added to that, the theming of this area was like I wanted it to feel like it was kind of sinking and that it was sort of surrounded by this kind of water piling in from all sides. Um, yeah, I guess like another note on the the theme of this area, it's like it was kind of the last one for me to conceptualize because I had like the the North African area, the Caribbean area, and the Southeast Asian area, and those felt fairly like spread out geographically. And I was thinking like, okay, how do I, what other kind of like cultures have this sort of pirate seafaring heritage that I can depict in a convincing way? And I thought, okay, maybe I can actually do something a bit more fantastical, and maybe it's kind of maybe this is where like the treasure is, and these other cultures are sort of like there's maybe a bit of a narrative that they're kind of trying to find this place.
It's a cool
So
way to
that's a
turn it
bit
on
of
its head a
the
little bit.
yeah. I thought it'd be like um nice to have something which is a bit more like from antiquity rather than that kind of uh modern period that we associate pirates with.
And like you say about the kind of water coming in on everything, for whatever reason, when I was looking at the park the first time, I was really struck by this little pathway here, just overlooking the water, just so high up off the water with this, nice stacked stone behind it. It just had such a kind of nice look. You can kind of picture yourself there watching the water splash ride come down and everything, and just I always like these. I mean, this makes me feel like old school RCT a little bit, where it's these splash boats rides that just kind of go forever. I mean, this
Yeah,
one's what
it's really long.
7 8
Yeah,
minutes nearly, and it just kind of crisscrosses, and you don't know where the layout goes. You just kind of see them all coming together in the middle. I always sort of like that thing where it makes you get into it and make stuff invisible and try and find out where it all goes to and comes from.
yeah, Yeah, no, you're spot on. That was completely what I was going for. So I'm happy to hear that that's what you saw in it as well.
It's
Um,
cool to have those sort of rides where you can kind of see all the bits and pieces, but then you got to explore a little bit to actually really make sense of it. So you have the nice, compositional themed things, and then you got to dig a little further to get the whole picture. I love this
yeah,
coaster. This one turned out really nice. I love these like arched bridges on the way in, and then of course the Sphinx heads here as the kind of top of this mountain.
yeah, yeah,
That's clever.
yeah. Um, yeah, it was fun building this layout. I think it was pretty soon after this new track type and track pieces had been released. So it was like yeah, it was just really good to try them out and see the kind of flowy possibilities that you get with it.
Love this shit.
Um, thanks.
Especially, and let's talk about the ships for a minute. It's every one of these areas, and we'll see more as we keep on going, has just such a great variety of ship. And you're already dealing with the limitations of no custom scenery, but you're making all of these individually interesting and unique and everything else. This one's on a diagonal in this sense, and kind of split in
Hmm.
half, and then you have all these different ones that just have such a unique character to themselves. And
Yeah.
how did you keep it fresh?
Um, to tell you the truth, I hated it. Like I really am not someone that enjoys building this kind of thing, like sculptures or ships like this, or and it was kind of one of the things when I was doing this project, I was like, oh, I know I'm gonna have to make some convincing looking boats. So it was really like a challenge. I was like, okay, let's just do this. And like, I had this large section off map where I was just like copying and pasting bits of track, you know, constantly iterating different shapes, different sizes, um, seeing how you kind of fill all the gaps that you get between sort of objects and coaster track and yeah, and obviously like with this kind of thing you also have to look at a lot of references and do a lot of research, and that's something that in RCT I'm not so big on. Like I kind of just enjoy being quite spontaneous and just go with the flow, but with this I really had to sort of, you know, okay, look at the picture, go back in game, think like, okay, no, these masts should be higher, or they should have more sails, or all this type of thing. Like it was really, it didn't come naturally to me, but uh, yeah, I'm kind of glad um, that I really went for it, because I think it's something that people are really impressed um,
They
with the
are.
park.
I absolutely, to me that struck me as I went around the whole thing is, I was thinking of all the amazing buildings and ride layouts and everything, but really what brings it together is just all these different boats and ships throughout the whole space and, different themed areas, but all sitting in that same body of water. So it really has the cohesion to tie the whole park together. Um, and
Yeah,
it's refreshing to hear that you got to go back to reference imagery and things like that it's always kind of nice to hear that it doesn't all come naturally. You got to do some work and put in the research a little bit to make it like it is, because I find myself spending hours doing things sometimes because I just gotta go digging and find a reference image because it certainly isn't coming out of my head alone naturally.
yeah. I mean, that was definitely the case with like in the Indonesian area. If you look at the boats there, I didn't really know, for instance, what these kind of ships looked like from. I didn't have that kind of picture in my head, so it's really, yeah, I had to go digging a bit.
I love the
Um,
wide sails and everything like that, and the kind of long boat.
yeah. Another important point is like, there's just no way I would have been able to do this without scenery manager and copying and pasting, and for one, having the ability to like iterate these designs, like copy, paste, change it a bit, try again. But then also like the compositional thing of just being able to like design the area and then place them in. And maybe I'm not happy with the placement straight away. So it's like, save the game, place them, like, okay, that doesn't work, try again. And you find something that you're happy with in the end.
Mhm.
And like that just wouldn't have been possible like, you know, a few years ago, right? It would have been like you commit to a spot and then you start all this kind of laborious work with, you know, making the coaster track and doing all that. And then, you might in the end be like, I don't really love this position, but I've put a lot of hard work into it, so whatever, it's going to stay there.
Right.
Um,
I feel
so I
like
think
in
that's
the
something that,
past, I was gonna say, I feel like in the past you did do that where you maybe put out something you weren't totally satisfied with, but it's been a darn long time doing it, so you're not gonna go redo it again. But now you
yeah,
have the ability to actually really perfect it.
yeah. I mean, I'm also quite OCD about like compositional things and sight lines, and like I want everything to be like in just the right spot. So it's really, yeah, for me, it's a kind of lifesaver being able to do that.
A big fan of this coaster. I've always liked suspended coasters in the game just because you don't see them super often, and they're kind of limited in what you can do with them. But you can get a nice flowy layout sometimes. And the nice thing is that's really the only thing you can do with these is just combine a bunch of curves together and really make it work from that standpoint. But I love how realistic this feels in the fantastical environment, and it's a great layout. I love the interaction with these big, tall, it feels like Hilong Bay sort of cliffs and things. I really enjoy.
Yeah. No, thanks. I think, yeah, you're totally right that there's not a lot you can do besides some kind of flowy looking curves. So yeah, it was just from the beginning really about thinking about how it works with the landscape and um yeah, also creating some nice kind of sight lines from the path or yeah.
Fun color scheme too on this one. This whole area's got that sort of nice natural wood, very warm browns and everything. And then I like the idea of going for the bold color on the supports, which are a little more hefty on this one since you've got your lattice on the lift hill and everything. So it stands out and pops against the landscape, which I think just is such a key feature of colors and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, again it was a bit of like a bit of a throwback in terms of like having different colors for the rails and being a bit sort of I don't know. I think quite often I'm just trying to be a bit weird with color choices
But I think
and
you
do
gotta
stuff
be.
that's like out of the ordinary. Yeah.
I feel like when I was building a lot of early stuff, it was all very brown, gray, black, white, all very kind of natural tones. And it took me selecting things that I thought there's no way this is going to look good, but I'll try it anyway, and then select it. And turns out it actually works all right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back to this little Pagoda Peninsula here because this is one of my favorite things in the whole park. This pagoda with the wood track texture on the whole thing, and then the diagonal base with the fencing, also made out of rails, and then the maze used here for the landscaping. Like this is a super technically complex piece of stuff here. Very impressive.
Yeah. No, it was yeah, again just the result of experimenting and copying, pasting things and yeah.
Hmm.
Um sometimes it's, I'm not necessarily trying to I don't maybe have that tower in mind. I'm just playing with like what kind of roof structures are possible and then something else comes out of it and I'm like, oh, this can work for this and yeah. That's generally how a lot of my ideas come about. It's like I'm just sort of messing around in general and then stuff stuff happens and then I'm like, oh, I can use that for that. I can use that for that. It's not always super focused.
Well, and thank God for all these Asian themed market stalls in the original game because they really do a lot of heavy lifting for
Yeah,
carrying the
that's
vibe of
true.
these roofs.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, I also wanted to have like a lot of kind of tiled roof because that's something that I use in the other areas, and I wanted it to be like quite consistent across the whole map, like the kind of so that the color and texture palette is more or less the same. Um, and yeah, I'm also trying to mix in here some like like Dutch colonial influence because this is supposed to be like Indonesia. So
Great.
in how the kind of in the way that the gables of the buildings look, yeah, just ways to try and make the theme a little bit, give it a bit of depth, somehow.
But you can see that transition, from the more
Yeah,
traditional Asian here right into more of the colonial aspects of sort of kind of creeping in on the side here. I
yeah,
love this swing ride with this just kind of fantastic tableau of race paddy sort of themes here nestled in within the larger cliffs and everything. I've always liked seeing the kind of yellow flower or kind of green flowers sort of spammed across, and combined with your maze pieces here, just looks so good.
yeah. Thanks. I was trying to create a bit of like a forced perspective thing at the top with the. I was thinking like the mine hut thing is maybe I'm trying to make the buildings look a bit smaller
Mhm.
when they're further away, but it's quite difficult to do that with the maze, because like, you know, it's not like the curves can get any finer in detail, right? It all has to stay kind of the same.
Yeah, and the maze is not
Um,
an easy ride to work with either. Or at least it
yeah,
isn't to me. So it's always cool to see it done in sort of unique, interesting ways.
yeah,
You can definitely see your inspiration from this one. I called out Disney Sea Tower of Terror pretty early on with the nice wing walls up top or these kind of pieces stretching out. I like this as that sort of focal feature of this area. That was cool to see this,
yeah,
especially the statue and everything as well.
yeah, yeah. No, I thought it would be a fun take on it. It's also like in each area, I have these kind of towers. So I wanted, yeah, this sort of repeating motif. So if you look, for instance, I mean, you mentioned it already, the White Castle in the Caribbean area. And then, of course, there's the lighthouse next to the entrance. And then there's this kind of temple in the Atlantis area, um, which you also mentioned with the Sphinx. Yeah. So I knew quite early on that I wanted some kind of landmark type thing in
Again, that helps
in
tie
each
it tie it
corner.
together. You've got
Yeah.
different varying themes, different textures, different colors, all that, but there's those things that maybe your typical viewer isn't going to, put right on the nose to say, ah, there's towers that combine all these things together. But I feel like it implicitly still registers of, oh yeah, each one of these things has this kind of same similar sense of scale through the whole thing, and it carries the part, together.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a fun ride. I like these little pedal monorails, and I've been trying to find ways to incorporate them into other projects and things because I like the idea of it really doesn't change height. I mean, you can do it with hacking, I guess, and stuff like that, but you're kind of forced into a very limited ride type, but trying to weave it in through theming and everything else just to give it sort of an interesting design. Like I love the way that this goes through these couple of sails and then in through the one building and across the water and then into the other building. Like it would be a really fun ride to do, and it's not something that's typically regarded as a terribly interesting ride in this game, but made it interesting.
Yeah. I just knew that I wanted some kind of tracked ride there because I was kind of like a bit short on kind of non roller coaster attractions dotted around. Yeah, and this kind of fitted in nicely as something that passed from one side of the canal to the other and kind of weaved through the sails a bit. Yeah, because it had to be something that was like elevated off the ground, so it kind of
Mm-hmm.
made sense that it was this kind of monorail type thing.
Sort of
Yeah,
Dutch canal. One's here with the lower path and the nice
yeah,
W type walls on the side here at the of the fencing. So transition here into our kind of final larger area, sort of the type area here. Love this wooden coaster, especially the alternating color trains. Um, Always a fan of seeing that used because I don't personally use it terribly often. I
mm,
really ought to, just because I feel like it adds a fun extra dimension to the ride.
yeah. Well, I've honestly like no idea if that's something that um that roller coasters have in real life or not. It was just like, okay, I can do something here with the color that kind of mimics how the sails look, or um, yeah,
I'd say it's plenty realistic.
that
You
was
know,
it really.
I've seen parks do it. Again, I don't feel like enough parks do it. I feel like that's an
Yeah,
opportunity that more places ought to
yeah,
do. But I just think it's kind of neat, and this is a fun layout too. A lot of these low to the ground corners, like I really like this one that sort of mirrors this guy, and just again, kind of very swoopy
yeah,
corners, and you don't see the 6 seat cars used terribly often. I don't feel like I like seeing them. They look a little chunkier than the other ones, and I don't know, nice proportion to.
yeah. No, I don't really know what my intention was with this layout beyond like I was quite attracted to how like old school wooden coasters look in Roller Coaster Tycoon, where it's like you sort of see these swooping turns and you kind of yeah, I don't know. I was just sort of like following my instinct a bit with the aesthetics of it, and um, yeah, I
Like,
also liked how it kind of looked against this sand, so having this kind of dark brown, kind of making the supports look again a bit more textured because they're kind of more noticeable against that bright background.
well, and you're right with that kind of traditional RCT wooden coaster feel, where I couldn't necessarily call out a manufacturer for this one, whereas I can for all the other ones. But this has
Yeah,
got kind of
exactly.
a neat mix of just different things. I really like the unbanked track here versus the high speed corners here, and these two stood out to me. You really don't see just the standard helix pieces used in the game almost ever. I feel like, and I think this works really well here.
Yeah, yeah. I always think they look great, so I
A
tend to use them a lot.
cool cue walk
Maybe
around
I'm in the
again.
minority though.
I mean, I feel like it's just you just need to be a little experimental with it sometimes to actually get it to work right. But I
Yeah,
think that this is a cool ending to me. You know, first of all, the hop over the station here, this helix nestled within the queue itself. Then you're going under the track, airtime hill underneath this queue again, little head chopper, I'm sure right there, another airtime hill, and then come around to the backside. Like it's really does a lot in a short span.
yeah,
And then as we continue into kind of the area proper. Another coaster that I don't see very often, and I say coaster lightly, is I don't count powered coasters in real life, but I like seeing them in the game a lot, just because again, it's one of those that I don't think is terribly um, easy to build with, especially to
yeah.
get something right with these, because I feel like you can't have a lot of just traditional hills, at least
Exactly.
at the
Yeah.
beginning and the end. You got to do it with helixes and just little transitions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's basically why I wanted to build one because I don't think I've ever really given it a proper go before. And indeed, when you don't have that kind of vertical change of like a lift hill and then drops of varying size, it's like, what do you do? And yeah, you kind of just have to have a bunch of turns and stuff. So then I was like, okay, then maybe it's cool if the whole thing is sort of elevated and it's sort
Hmm.
of just kind of takes you among these rooftops, and it's kind of like this sea breeze kind of thing. Um, so yeah, that's what I was going for basically. I would have liked to have had like maybe some more moving parts on the rooftops, like just more spinning things to suggest this kind of wind and movement.
It's a neat,
But yeah,
it's a
I
neat
was really
design
happy with it.
though. I like the the consistency of the white with the um, black wood slat pieces for the roofs. Like it's another one of those good color selection things where you've got the sort of monotone base with the uh, coaster doing the kind of heavy work here from a color standpoint, and then on this dome building here, some beautiful stacked fences that really add a kind of neat texture to it with the playing cards underneath. I had to deconstruct that one to figure it out initially, but it was kind of a
Yeah,
fun detail.
yeah, yeah. Also a fun experiment when I made it. I was like, oh, this is like almost looks like tiles, so this is quite cool. Yeah, I think this building probably I took some influence from like the Dome of Rock in Jerusalem, and yeah, and then I think there's also some other tiled buildings dotted around where I'm either using playing cards or the kind of one of the urban wall textures.
Yeah, there's the urban wall
Um,
here.
yeah, no, it was these kind of things. It was like a yeah, nice discovery and a nice way to sort of sell that theme a little bit more.
One of the things that
Yeah,
I enjoy with NCSO and watching people who are good at it, like you know, do these builds is, seeing scenery that you would never think is useful scenery for any kind of, high level park building used in a way that looks good. Like seeing the playing cards pop up, I always enjoy. I remember that from Ancient Worlds too, behind the glass. But it's kind of
yeah,
a neat thing to see those pop up because you're just like, this is never going to fit anywhere, but it works.
yeah, for sure. That's certainly one of the most enjoyable things about building this way is like these kind of aha moments when you know you find it a cool use for like a weird object. Yeah,
Yeah, because I think like up of this tower is one of the yeah, that's a neat little ad there, and just all the different signs and everything, and it's just such a fun, almost like an Easter egg hunt a little bit to see where you can find kind of the weird objects used in a way that makes them actually seem functional.
yeah,
Sure, it was probably a challenge to find where you got the pirate ship placed because I'm sure you could easily have put this in any number of different areas.
yeah, yeah. Although it does kind of suit itself to like a more Mediterranean style ship somehow, or like I don't know. I always imagine it being like this kind of like ancient Greek kind of trireme. How is it you say it? Yeah, this kind of
It does have that vibe to it.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, you're kind of limited in terms of like what you can use for a cockpit type thing. Um, Obviously, if it's like a single rail wide, you have more options with like a for the roof and this like using these station pieces. But if it's like centered over two tiles, it, dog again. Let's see if this continues. Hey,
Well,
okay,
that's
no
to
problem.
me that's one of the hardest things I would think.
What?
You got your one across, which like you said, is a little more straightforward, but then the two across is tough, and really until you get to the three where you can have a center line of something again, it's a challenge I would think to get variety and just interesting details and stuff like that with the limited selection that you've got.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also like having to mix like so here for instance I've got like some coaster track for the sails, and then other times I'm using fences because it's like, aligned on the edge of a tile. And it's like, um, yeah, I wasn't completely sure how well mixing those things would work, but in the end, it actually like kind of came together fine. It wasn't something that particularly stood out as like inconsistent in the
No, it looks
style.
great. I feel like the variety is what kind of brings it together to say that hey, you can
Mm,
do a boat in 30 different ways here. Here's all the different examples of it. And I love how when you zoom out, you get the nice depth texture and everything going here. So I'm sure you spent a lot of time on the ocean floor here, I guess, making
yeah,
this unique and interesting. And then also just all your um, plants and rocks and giant squids
yeah,
and everything else.
yeah. It's supposed to be like an X as well, like a kind of treasure map X. That's the sort of
Oh, I
shape
love
of it.
it. Oh, that's so
Yeah,
cool. The treasure buried
yeah.
there?
It's it sort of happened by accident actually, because I started like defining the shapes of these kind of peninsulas with towers on them, and I was like, oh, actually, it kind of makes starts to make this sort of X shape, so I should run with that.
That is
And
cool. I
yeah,
I love those sort of larger motif sort of things.
yeah.
Like Disney Hollywood Studios down here in Florida, when it first opened, the whole center plaza was a giant hidden Mickey, so you could only see it if you looked at it from maps. And it's
Oh,
it's
that's
still
cool.
there more or
Yeah,
less, but it's gotten modified a little bit. But I always liked that sort of a thing where it's something you're not going to pick up on until you look at the whole picture.
yeah,
So
yeah.
which one
Well, I
ended up
think
being
stuff.
your favorite area of all these?
Oof, I think I would say I like the Caribbean area the most, which is maybe the most like I don't know. It's for sure the most obvious take on a pirate theme, but I'm just very satisfied with how the building facades and texturing came out. And especially like if you turn the view one angle, yeah, like I really like this kind of feels like a townscape, And that was
Mm-hmm.
something in this project that I was really focusing on was like how to make it really feel like um like a town or something, and not just like a theme park where it's like um you have your kind of like path plazas, and it sort of is very organized, but I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to make something that had like back streets and like a bit more jumbled and disorganized. And yeah, I think this is the area that maybe that was the most successful
And two
with
things
that.
I didn't point out earlier when we were going through that I really enjoyed was the use of the standard stalls here as part of the
Mm,
facade because it adds a lot of that micro type texturing that you can't do typically in custom or no custom scenery just because you just don't have the size of pieces. So it's sort of neat to see that. And then like this guy facing the other direction, like you got the window and there's detail to those huts that isn't necessarily the functional detail. It's like the back of it's got a door or something like that. So it's a very clever way to bring in more detail to the scenery might not otherwise have it. Same thing with kind of inverting the idea of having this tower right here underneath of something else. So now you have that widening at the top, which is a really cool detail because really you don't have sort of inverted shapes like that to be able to go outwards, but with that you can.
yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. I was just trying to find any object I could that kind of didn't occupy the whole tile, so that yeah, for the kind of second stories you had this feeling of like an overhanging building. um I also used, I think, the haunted house. If you turn the camera and then go to the left a bit, if you just go up, no, to the right, sorry.
Aha, there we go.
Yeah, yeah. So if you turn, yeah,
Oh,
okay,
that's
it's not as
crazy.
obvious here, but yeah. So I was just trying to find any kind of possible object or ride that I could use to kind of create that effect.
I missed that one entirely on my first pass. That's great. And
Yeah.
even more impressive, I think, is that you can't color that haunted house, but it still fits the overall
Yeah.
vibe here.
Yeah.
With those sort of tans, and green actually works really, really well.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Is there any
Yeah. Another
hidden
thing.
Easter egg or anything that you want to point out that people might not have seen?
Mm, maybe so I put some crocodiles in the next to the uh yeah, next to this raft ride.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw them.
Like the bones. That's
Um
fun.
yeah, so those are just obviously like these dinosaur objects, and then I found that this bubbling goo object kind of was a nice way to suggest some kind of movement.
That really is.
Um yeah.
Water's rippling. It's
Uh
funny, saying or pointing this one out because it was one of those things that I looked at during my browse of the park, and when gators or crocodiles or whatever, that's pretty cool, and kind of moved along, and it didn't even register to me that that's not an object in the game. It's a dinosaur instead used as a gator. It's done in a way that you don't even think about it really, that oh yeah, you're using other objects to make other things, but for me it just registered as to what you intended it to be. So that's a fun. I mean, I guess it's successful when that's how it happens.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Besides that, I don't think I can think of any other like hidden little things. There's like a next to the Gerstlauer spinning bobsled coaster, there's like a rum bottle made from a chess piece. So it's
Ah,
like
there
the
you
queue
go.
entrance. Yeah,
Nice.
because the ride's called Rum Plunderer, so I thought like make a bottle of rum.
Very good. That's pretty cool.
Uh, yeah, don't know.
You're putting
I'm
chess
sure
pieces
there's
to
I'm
good
sure there's
use.
other
I
stuff.
remember the horse
Yeah,
from Evergreen Gardens, so
yeah,
getting
yeah.
around
Getting a
out of
lot of
those.
mileage out of those. Yeah, yeah,
Well, this is a pretty impressive park, and it's I think it has, to me, vibes of Ancient Worlds and some of those older parks done in a new modern style with just a lot more detail and kind of design intent behind it, and it's just kind of cool to see the progression of that. I remember when we looked at Ancient Worlds way back when, it was one of those that, like, man, this is the pinnacle. Like, I don't see how you get better than this, and I think you topped it
yeah,
here.
yeah. It's good. Yeah, it might sound arrogant, but even like I kind of thought that when I'd made it, I was like, oh, I'm super proud of this. That I don't think I can actually make something that I like more. And then, yeah, with this one, actually, maybe I do like it more. But then they're also quite different in that, like, yeah, Ancient was maybe a bit more realistic. Like, I did put a bit of focus on things like, yeah, made some like backstages and kind of, um, yeah, it goes back to a bit what I was saying about the path layout feeling more theme parky. And this, I'm kind of trying to make it a bit more like immersive in the theming, and like like every rooftop is themed. It's not like a thing where I have these sort of flat unthemed roofs, which of course would be realistic, but in this case I was like, nah, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to focus on the viewer, the kind of
Hmm.
RCT viewer immersion of looking top down. And um yeah, and I think it just has that extra level of detail. And when I look
Right.
at Ancient Worlds now, I'm a bit like, oh, it's actually like it's a little bit bare, a little bit bare and kind of soulless, which I think people even like said at the time. But I was like, I didn't really care. I was like, I don't, I'm not interested in detailing. I just want to make a kind of cool composition, and yeah, but yeah,
cool to have those focal points on each one of the parks. And I mean, I look at this
Yeah.
type of park as what I would call fantastical realism, where it's has a basis in realism. Like all these coasters have a manufacturer more or less, and you're thinking through this in terms of some level of park building and experiential design, but it's you know well beyond typically what you would see in a real life situation, but just like you said, you're designing for the viewer, and I feel like that's always a
Yeah.
balance, especially when you do realism or even semi-realism, is building for the peep view versus building for you know the actual player who's looking at this from their computer. That you're not at peep view, you're at four isometric angles, and that's all you got, so you got to really
Yeah.
play to that in a sense.
Yeah. But I love both approaches. I really like when people kind of go to town on making elaborate backstages and making this kind of like really sort of emphasizing this thin veil between the two worlds of the
Hmm.
kind of themed and the kind of infrastructural. Like I think that's like you can do really interesting narrative things with that. Um, but yeah, I think with this project, it was like it just somehow wouldn't have made sense to have like a lot of um, sort of big bare roofs and um, yeah, I don't know. I think whatever you pick, you've just got to be really consistent with it, right? And
Hmm.
somehow it just made sense to go all out with the theming here.
Then I guess that leads into my last question for you. Then is what's next? Have something that you're planning or enjoying right now?
Uh, yeah, I'm currently making a park with custom scenery, and I'm kind of yeah, it has again like an overarching theme like this, and the overarching theme is like stuff in a giant scale. So like there's kind of a giant toyland, a giant candyland, a giant woodland, and then a giant kind of beach sandcastle type area.
That sounds pretty interesting.
And yeah, and it's also kind of a spiritual successor to this project and Ancient Worlds in that both of these use the kind of classic scenery groups,
Hmm.
like you have pirate theming or you have classical Roman or ancient Egyptian. Um, and yeah, with this one that I've started working on, uh, you know, some of the scenery groups that don't really get used are like these giant candy scenery or uh, the giant chess pieces or I don't. There's a lot of like giant stuff, giant garden,
Hmm.
giant sports, and like generally they're a bit crap, right? Like they have all the
Right.
objects that no one uses in NCSO. But I thought it'd be like a nice departure point for a park concept. Um, and yeah, it's just nice to use custom objects and really kind of go to town on uh, making them convincing. So that's
Pretty cool. I'm
basically what I'm
excited to see
doing.
that.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Cool.
a lot of fun. Also, the kind of brainstorming aspect, like thinking, oh, how would this look, on a massive scale, or yeah. Anyway, I'll stop rambling.
No, I think
Yeah,
I'm sure I can speak for everybody watching that we're excited to see that one come to fruition. So it's always nice to see your breadth of game, from NCSO to custom to even back to RCT1 days. It's a lot of variety there, but incredible park as far as this one goes. Really, really enjoyed it. Really, I hate building custom or no custom scenery. I've made that very known, but these kind of parks make me want to try. It's
yeah,
always one of those things where I find some of the most successful parks are the ones that just get me amped up to try and build something myself. Or that
yeah.
I want to go back and reference all the time, and I feel like this is one of those parks.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah.
Well done, I appreciate it, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Alrighty, well, I'm gonna post a link to the description or a link to the park in the description, so you can check it out for yourself. You'll want Open RCT2 to view this one, just for some of the new features and new track types and everything. I'll provide a link to that as well. And we've got plenty more reviews coming. I appreciate Alex joining us today, and we have got actually a lot more parks to look at. So I'm going to try and keep a little more consistent here, coming through with the rest of these. So. Until next time, thank you all very much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Bye.